What if silence wasn't surrender, but awakening? Not the silence meant to provoke a reaction, but the kind that comes when a man finally sees through the illusion, when he stops chasing confusion, stops explaining his worth to someone who stopped listening, and instead of sending one more message, he sends nothing. Because he's no longer waiting to be chosen, he's choosing himself. And that's when something unexpected happens. Not just in her, but in him. She expected chaos, tears, late-night texts, explanations wrapped in desperation. But what she got was the quiet strength of a man who no longer folds. Because true power never needs to shout. It withdraws, it reflects, and then it rebuilds. And once you've tasted that kind of stillness, there's no going back. If you're ready to stop reaching, if you're done trying to be understood by someone who never really tried to know you, then lean into the silence that separates you from the man you used to be, and welcome the one who's about to rise. Like the video, subscribe to Stoic Station. This isn't about getting her back, it's about getting yourself back. 1. She expected chaos. You gave her silence. She knew how this was supposed to go. She pulls back. You reach harder. She withholds answers. You over-explain. She gets cold. You unravel. That's what always happened, not just with you, but with nearly every man before you. And that's the pattern she was counting on, because the game only works when the other person plays along. She expected breakdowns at 2 a.m. She expected long messages that started with, "I just want to talk." She expected to see you react, not because you're weak, but because you're emotionally invested. And that investment, that was the stage where her ego stood tall. But something shifted. This time, when she distanced herself, you didn't panic, you didn't chase, you didn't pour out your thoughts hoping she'd meet you with clarity. You went still. And that stillness didn't validate her assumptions, it destroyed them. Because in that moment, she realized that what gave her leverage wasn't her words, it wasn't even her presence, it was your emotional response to her absence. That was the real power she held, until you took it back. Her power depended on your pain. Her sense of control came from your need for her. But when you no longer reached, no longer explained, no longer needed, something inside her trembled. Because the silence you gave her wasn't passive. It wasn't the silence of a man unsure of what to say. It was the silence of a man who no longer needed to say anything. That silence became a mirror. And when she looked into it, she didn't see your desperation. She saw her reflection losing its shape. The attention she once relied on to reaffirm her worth was gone, not stolen, not wrestled from her, simply withdrawn, gently, completely, without apology. And here's the part she never prepared for. When you didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't fall apart. That's when the power shifted. Not with noise, but with absence. Not with anger, but with emotional clarity. She thought your silence was weakness. But now she's beginning to see the truth. Your silence was a declaration, a boundary, a transformation. You didn't disappear to punish her. You disappeared to remember yourself. Because this time, you're not trying to get her back. You're trying to get yourself back. And that's the part of the script she never saw coming. 2. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was war without blood. You didn't storm out. You didn't send one last dramatic text. You didn't block her, blast her, or burn the bridge. You did something far more powerful. You went silent. Not the kind of silence that begs to be noticed, not the cold shoulder disguised as strategy, but the kind of silence that comes from finally understanding your worth. A silence that doesn't need to be explained, because it explains everything. She expected a reaction, anger, sadness, closure. Even conflict would have comforted her, because it would have meant she still had access to you. But what she got instead was the terrifying realization that she no longer did. You didn't retreat, you recalibrated. You didn't shut down, you leveled up. Your absence wasn't avoidance, it was intention. Your quiet wasn't confusion, it was clarity. You saw that your presence had been too available, that your energy had been given to someone who never truly held space for it. So, you made the strongest move a man can make. You withdrew it, cleanly, calmly, with no promises, no warnings. Silence isn't weakness, it's war without blood. And right now, you're winning. Because while she scrolls through your socials looking for signs you're hurting, you're not hurting, you're healing. While she wonders if you're okay, you're out building something she never thought you'd build without her, a life she no longer has access to. And maybe it wasn't her fault. Maybe she never knew the impact her inconsistency had on you. But you know now. You know how much it cost you to keep showing up for someone who couldn't meet you halfway. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped walking through one that was never truly open. And that quiet departure, it carried more weight than all the noise in the world. Because silence, when rooted in self-respect, isn't empty. It's full of lessons, full of boundaries, full of the man you're becoming. And if she ever circles back looking for the old you, she won't find him, because he stopped talking the day he realized no one was really listening. And the man who showed up in his place no longer needs to speak to be heard. 3. The fire didn't break you. It forged you. No one saw what those nights felt like. You didn't broadcast your breakdown. You didn't go online to vent. You sat in it, alone, with nothing but the echo of your own questions. What went wrong? Was I not enough? Did she ever really care? You stared into the emotional fire, and you didn't blink. You felt the ache in your chest, the pull of old habits, the desperate need for validation that used to drive your every move. But this time, you didn't escape it. You didn't distract yourself with someone new. You didn't run to prove your worth. You stayed, and that changed everything. Most men don't. Most men break under that kind of silence. They rush to fill the void. They numb out with cheap connections or chase closure in all the wrong places. But not you. You're doing what 99% of men don't have the balls to do. You're standing in the fire. You're letting it change you. Because pain, when you face it fully, doesn't destroy you. It sharpens you. It burns away the weakness you were hiding behind. It exposes the part of you that was still looking for love in places where love had already left. And once you stop avoiding that truth, something deeper takes root. Your focus tightens, your emotions settle, your clarity returns. You're no longer driven by reaction. You're grounded in awareness. You start asking better questions, making sharper choices, and finally setting standards that match your true worth. This isn't about proving her wrong. It's not about becoming better so she regrets it. This isn't revenge. It's resurrection. You're rising from something that tried to hollow you out, and instead of making you bitter, it made you clearer, more direct, more self-respecting. You no longer carry the weight of someone else's confusion. You've replaced it with purpose. And now, you're not just stronger on the surface, you're stronger from the inside out. Because fire doesn't fake growth, it forces it. You didn't need someone to save you from the pain. You needed the pain to save you from the parts of yourself that still settled. And that version of you, the one who stopped running and chose to evolve instead, that man is becoming unstoppable. 4. Peace becomes non-negotiable after chaos. You used to believe connection was the goal. That being close, even in chaos, was better than feeling distant. So you tolerated uncertainty. You accepted mixed signals. You ignored how drained you felt after every call, every encounter, every time you gave more than you got. Because to you, the worst thing wasn't confusion, it was silence. But something changed when the silence finally came, and you didn't rush to fill it. You let it stretch. You let it echo. You sat with your thoughts, even the uncomfortable ones, and in that stillness, something new emerged. Clarity. You didn't need the noise. You needed the truth. And the truth was, you'd been trading your peace for proximity. You were giving access to someone who hadn't earned presence. And while that may have felt normal before, it now feels intolerable. Once you've tasted emotional chaos, peace becomes non-negotiable. That line isn't just a philosophy, it's a threshold, a moment of no return. Because once you've lived in emotional instability, once you've felt the anxiety of waiting on texts, decoding reactions, wondering where you stand, you realize what it costs. And now, you won't pay that price again. You no longer chase women who confuse you. You don't lean into the uncertainty, hoping it will somehow turn into something stable. You don't romanticize the emotional highs and lows and mistake that roller coaster for love. You've learned that peace isn't boring. It's a sign of maturity. That real connection doesn't come from chaos. It comes from clarity. And anyone who threatens that clarity with games, silence, or manipulation simply doesn't make the cut anymore. The old you would have bent, would have held on, would have kept trying to make it work. But the man you're becoming has standards now, not out of pride, but out of purpose. You know what peace feels like now, and once you've felt it, you'll protect it like a sacred ground. Because when your nervous system is calm, your choices are stronger. When your heart isn't constantly anxious, your mind is free to build. And when you're not chasing someone else's approval, you finally remember your own value. So no, it's not that you've become closed off or cold. It's that you've become committed to yourself, to your boundaries, to your future. Because peace isn't something you hope to find in someone else anymore. It's something you now refuse to live without. 5. Don't spend emotional currency on the past. You used to scroll through her stories like they held some hidden message. You checked if she watched yours, as if that meant something. You analyzed silence like it was a puzzle you were supposed to solve. You were paying with the most valuable thing you have. Not money, not time, but your attention. And now you see it for what it was. Emotional currency. Spent on someone who was no longer investing in you. Every ounce of attention you give to the past is energy stolen from your future. It's that simple, not symbolic, not poetic, real. When your thoughts circle back to someone who walked away, you're withdrawing power from the man you're trying to become. You don't owe her your focus, not anymore. Your attention is no longer a gift to be given away without thought. It's a resource, and like any valuable resource, it either fuels your growth or delays it. So you stopped looking, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about what's ahead to keep staring into what's already behind you. You stopped letting curiosity masquerade as closure. You stopped giving your energy to someone who hasn't earned the right to shape your emotional world anymore. And what happened next surprised you. You got sharper. Your thoughts grew quieter. You started to build again. The space her story once occupied in your mind, it made room for your purpose, for your clarity, for the things you've always known you're capable of, but were too distracted to pursue. Your attention is a currency now, one you invest into your body, your work, your growth, and the more you withdraw it from what's behind you, the faster you move toward what's ahead. You're no longer interested in proving your worth to someone who already decided to stop seeing it. You're not looking for signs in the silence anymore. You are becoming the sign of healing, of evolution, of what it looks like when a man refuses to keep feeding energy to ghosts. She had her chance to know the depth of your presence. Now, you're giving it to someone who truly deserves it, yourself. Because you finally understand, peace doesn't come from watching her stories. It comes from rewriting your own. 6. You bled for someone who wouldn't offer a band-aid. There's a specific kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't show up in words or wounds you can point to. It builds slowly, in silence, in moments when you keep showing up, keep giving, keep loving, with nothing ever returned. She knew you were hurting. She knew the effort it took just to keep holding things together. She knew the weight of your loyalty. She could feel it in the way you responded, in the way you stayed through the confusion, in the way you believed that if you gave just a little more, she might finally understand. But she didn't. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care enough to meet you there. She kept taking, kept testing, kept watching you bleed, and somewhere deep down, a part of her assumed you'd always keep doing it. That you were the kind of man who would endure it all and still return with open arms. And for a while, she was right. Until you weren't. Because something in you woke up, not in rage, not in bitterness, but in a quiet moment where you finally asked yourself, why am I still giving to someone who doesn't know how to give back? That's when everything changed. You stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer a band-aid. You stopped overextending your heart for someone who met vulnerability with indifference. And no, that shift didn't make you colder. It made you clear. There's a lie men are often told, that enduring pain is the same as love. That staying is noble, even when the staying breaks you. But real strength isn't in how much pain you can carry for someone else. It's in knowing when to put it down and say, this is no longer mine to hold. Now, you don't offer access to people who can't offer reciprocity. You don't explain your worth to someone who couldn't see it when it was freely given. And that's not heartlessness. That's healing. You've learned that not everyone deserves your softness, and protecting your peace doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. You've reclaimed the most sacred part of yourself, your emotional generosity, and you've placed boundaries around it, not to keep love out, but to make sure that when love enters your life again, it has the capacity to stay, to return, to honor you. You've come too far to offer your loyalty as a lifeline to someone who never learned how to swim toward you. And the next time someone steps into your life, you'll no longer bleed just to prove you care. You'll listen, you'll observe, and you'll only give from a place of mutual presence, not silent suffering. Because from this moment on, you don't bleed to be seen. You let your peace speak for itself. 7. She won't miss you until you're unreachable. She didn't miss you when you were still there. Not when you were sending the check-in texts, not when you were watching her stories, not when you were showing her, without saying it, that your heart was still open, still hoping. Because the truth is, people rarely miss what's still available. They only start to feel the loss when they can no longer reach it. And she could always reach you until she couldn't. You didn't announce your exit. You didn't write a final message explaining your worth. You just stopped feeding the cycle, quietly, consistently, without anger or drama. That's when it started to shift. At first, she told herself you'd come back, that your silence was temporary, that maybe you were just playing the same game she was playing. But days passed, then weeks, and still nothing. And now the silence is no longer yours, it's hers, and it's growing louder by the day. That's the moment when curiosity turns into discomfort, not because she misses who you were when you chased her, but because she's realizing she can't access you anymore, and that's what unsettles her. The man who once gave her the certainty of his presence has become the man she can no longer predict, no longer read, no longer rely on to validate her worth. She starts to revisit old conversations. She scrolls through your photos. She checks your activity to see if something, anything, might suggest you still care. But you don't leave traces now. You don't give clues. You've become emotionally unreachable. And no, it's not a punishment. You're not doing this to create regret. You're doing it because you've finally realized that peace is impossible when you're always available to someone who doesn't value what you offer. She didn't miss you when she had easy access to you, because she mistook your presence for permanence. But now you're gone, not out of spite, but out of strength. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped waiting to be chosen. And that's the version of you she'll miss the most. The one she thought she could take for granted, only to learn too late that the man who disappears without noise is often the one who leaves the deepest echo. 8. You didn't just go silent, you went sovereign. She thought silence was a strategy, that you were pulling back just to provoke a reaction, that you were waiting for her to notice, to worry, to miss you. She assumed it was temporary, just another pause in the push and pull. But this time, something was different. This wasn't silence for effect. This was silence born of a man who'd outgrown the need to explain himself. Because you didn't just go silent, you went sovereign. There's a difference between disappearing and disconnecting. One is emotional withdrawal, the other is emotional evolution. And what you did wasn't a tactic, it was transformation. You used to wonder what she was thinking. You used to measure your worth by her attention. But now your focus has shifted inward. You've become occupied with your own expansion, your body, your work, your values. You've traded reaction for reflection. You no longer speak just to be heard. You speak when it matters, and lately it hasn't. She thought your stillness meant she had time, that eventually you'd crack, that the silence would get too heavy for you to carry. But what she never considered was that you'd get comfortable in the calm, that you'd build something in the quiet that made her chaos no longer welcome. She once had access to your emotion, your attention, your loyalty, and now she has none of it, not because you hate her, not because you're bitter, but because you finally built boundaries so strong, even your memories have to knock before they enter. You're not hiding, you're not waiting, you're not tracking her moves, you're not looking back, because you've realized the man who knows his worth doesn't have to raise his voice to prove it. He doesn't have to play games to protect it. He simply removes himself from environments that make him forget it. And now, you're not emotionally available to people who only show up when they feel your absence. You're no longer an option, no longer an emotional safety net, no longer a placeholder in someone else's indecision. She won't say it aloud, but she feels it. She senses the shift. The calm in your presence used to make her feel adored. Now it makes her feel disarmed, because she can't manipulate what she can't reach. And that's the difference between silence and sovereignty. Silence hopes to be heard. Sovereignty doesn't need to be. You didn't just go silent. You reclaimed the crown. 9. You were never the priority, just her option. There's a quiet kind of pain that doesn't come from being rejected. It comes from being tolerated. From being the man she didn't fully choose, but also never fully let go. You were close enough to be convenient, but never close enough to be her priority. You know what that feels like. The delayed replies, the breadcrumbs, the moments she'd disappear, only to return when she felt bored, lonely, or unsure about someone else. And because your heart was still open, you let her back in, again and again. Not anymore. Because now you see it clearly. You weren't her destination. You were her backup plan. She never closed the door completely because she wanted to know you'd still be there if her other plans fell through. That's not love. That's control dressed up in mixed signals. And for a while it worked, because you believed that your consistency would eventually earn you her clarity. But what you've come to realize is this: no one who sees you as a priority will ever treat you like a placeholder. You were never supposed to be on standby while she explored her options. You were never meant to be the man who waits in the shadows, hoping her confusion turns into commitment. That's not strength, that's self-abandonment. And that version of you, he's gone. Because now, you don't wait for someone else to recognize your value, you embody it. You don't stay emotionally available to someone who only shows up when they feel you slipping away. You don't beg to be upgraded from maybe to yes. You draw a line, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. You stop being an option by removing your presence completely. And when you do that, the power dynamic shifts. Not because you're playing games, but because you're finally honoring your worth. She thought you'd always be there, wounded, waiting, willing. But what she didn't see coming was your silence becoming permanent. You don't need closure from someone who never gave you clarity. You don't need permission to walk away from a role you were never meant to play. Because once a man sees through the illusion, he doesn't ask for more time. He takes back his identity. And when you stop allowing yourself to be an option, you become something she can no longer reach, a standard she was never ready to meet. 10. You don't need to be chosen. You chose yourself. You spent so long trying to prove you were worthy, not because you weren't, but because somewhere deep down, you thought love was something you had to earn. You bent, you adjusted, you tolerated. You stayed loyal in the face of silence, believing that if she just saw who you really were, she'd finally choose you. But that need to be chosen, that's what kept you stuck. It's what kept you from seeing what was right in front of you. She didn't see your value, not because it wasn't there, but because she was never looking for it. And now you've stopped waiting for someone else to hand you your validation. You've stopped hoping that being picked will make you feel whole. Because you don't need to be chosen anymore. You chose yourself. That shift changes everything. You no longer wake up wondering how she feels. You no longer move through your day with one eye on her page, one hand on your phone, hoping for a sign that you still matter. Now you move differently, with presence, with purpose. You eat better, train harder, think clearer, build deeper. You're no longer addicted to attention, you're focused on alignment. You've stopped chasing approval and started building identity. She thought walking away meant she won, that your silence was surrender, that your stillness was weakness. But what she didn't understand, what she's beginning to feel now, is that the man she left behind wasn't even your final form. Because the man you're becoming doesn't need to be validated to feel valuable. He doesn't beg for a seat at someone else's table. He builds his own. And the irony? The more you choose yourself, the more powerful your absence becomes. She may not admit it, but she feels the weight of your withdrawal. Not because you were dramatic, not because you made a scene, but because you simply stopped orbiting her world. You became unavailable, not out of pride, but out of evolution. Unreachable, not because you vanished, but because you finally arrived in your own life. You're not the man who needs to be seen anymore. You're the man who sees clearly now. And when she finally realizes what she lost, it won't be because you disappeared. It'll be because you elevated. This isn't the end of a love story. It's the beginning of your becoming. Because when a man chooses himself, the world starts choosing him differently. Summary: he didn't just walk away, he chose silence. And in that silence, he found everything he had been giving away to the wrong people, including himself. You didn't disappear to make her miss you. You didn't go silent to play a game or manipulate her emotions. You vanished because staying would have meant abandoning yourself. What started as heartbreak slowly became awakening. The quiet nights, the unanswered questions, the aching pull to reach out. You sat through all of it, not because you were numb, but because you were ready to stop chasing people who only saw your value when you made yourself smaller. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped auditioning for attention. And in that stillness, you didn't get weaker, you got sharper. Because silence wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of your sovereignty. Each moment you didn't react, you reclaimed energy. Each time you refused to break, you built discipline. And every time she checked and found nothing, no response, no reaction, no trace, you became more than a man who walked away. You became a man who evolved. She thought you needed her presence to feel whole. But what she never expected was that your absence would become the very thing she couldn't escape. And maybe she'll realize it too late. Maybe she won't say it out loud, but deep down, she'll know. She didn't lose the man who needed her. She lost the man who no longer did. So walk forward, not with resentment, but with reverence, for the man you are now, for the clarity you earned in silence, and for the future that no longer includes settling for half-hearted love. Because you're not the man she left behind, you're the man she never expected you to become. And from here on out, you don't chase, you don't prove, you don't wait, you choose you. And that choice, that quiet, final choice, is the one she'll never forget. You don't need to speak to prove your worth anymore. You don't need to stay where your value is questioned. This silence, it wasn't to be heard. It was so you could finally hear yourself. But here's the twist. The moment you stepped back, the moment you stopped reacting, something unexpected started happening. Not in you, but in her. Because real silence doesn't just clarify who you are, it forces her to face what she's been avoiding all along. The next part of this journey continues in the follow-up video. When you go silent, she starts to unravel. I've dropped the link in the pinned comment. See you there.